Hi, Matt Allington here. This is a YouTube only video today and I wanted to share with you my updated COVID report. So today here in Sydney, it's the 11th of August, so Wednesday the 11th of August. The latest data has just come out for the case tracking and the death tracking, and so I just wanted to share with you a few insights on the comparison between the wave last year, which is predominantly in Melbourne, where we had a large number of deaths and cases, and the current wave, which is predominantly Sydney-based, but it has started to spill out into some of the regions of New South Wales and also to a certain extent into Queensland and Melbourne. I've seen a lot of stuff on TV here in Australia saying that the Sydney wave is a lot worse than Melbourne, and I just want to share with you the facts so that we can see whether that's true or not. So I have many pages on this report. You can find the report here at xbi.com.au/ca, standing for COVID Australia. I keep it up to date and I'm continuously adding content to this report, and sometimes I share videos on how I actually built that content out. But today we're just going to look at some data. So I'm going to start over here at this phases compared small multiples, and as you can see on the screen I've got these small multiples. There are 4 phases that I've identified that have occurred here in Australia. I'm calling them phases, not waves, because this phase, which I'm calling the all quiet phase or phase 3, actually not much happened. We had a lot of stability. These cases, this bit of case noise that you can see here actually occurred in hotel quarantine, and there was very little outbreak in the general community, and when it did escape hotel quarantine, it was pretty easy to bring under control. So I'm going to move this slider. I'll come back and talk about this a little bit more now, but I'm going to move this death lag slider to the left. So now if you look at the small multiples here on the right hand side, you can see those 4 waves shown at equal scale. Now it's important to point out that I have taken a standardized approach of determining what is a wave. And so what I did was I looked for the day in which the 10th case was registered. So if we have 1 case, that's not a wave. If we have 2 cases, that's not a wave. But on the day that the 10th case in the community has been registered, that's when I triggered the start of each wave. And so you can see the first wave here, which is when it hit the world. And then the Melbourne wave here started in middle of last year. Then we had this long period followed by the 4th wave, which I'm now calling the June 21 wave. It started as Sydney. It's still predominantly Sydney, but increasingly it's now leached out into a bit into Melbourne, a bit into Queensland, and I'm not separating the data. This is Australian based data, and so I didn't want to call it the Sydney wave. I'm calling it the June 21 wave. Now you can see here on the chart, let's take the Melbourne wave because I think that is the clearest to understand. The light blue line is the cases as measured on the right hand axis, and the dark blue bars are the number of deaths as measured on the left hand axis. And it's clear from looking at this chart that the cases come first and then the deaths follow shortly thereafter, and hence that's what this death lag slider is for. So it allows me to do a time shift and move the deaths to the left so that I can align them with the actual cases. Now when I do that, and if I move it over say 11 days, you can see that it's getting closer. And from experience, 19 days is the right amount of lag. And so we start to see the impact of the cases in the form of deaths occurring 19 days after the number of cases is in the community. And so when I make that adjustment, you'll see this green line. So the green line is telling me that anything on the right-hand side of this green line, from a cases perspective, has not been considered in my analysis. I'm only considering the light blue line on the left-hand side of this green lag point. And I've done that because if you look at this last wave here, you can see that I don't want to take into account these cases here, right? So I don't want to take these cases into account because we haven't allowed the time for the deaths to occur to be able to accurately and consistently compare it with the Melbourne wave. And so that's why I've taken this approach. Okay, so now considering up to this green lag with a death lag of 19 days, you can see that the case fatality rate the total number of deaths divided by the total number of cases up until this green line is significantly different between what happened in Melbourne last year and in Sydney this year. 3.78 was the Melbourne case fatality rate up until the green line, and in June 21 wave, predominantly Sydney, it's 1.41, and that is 2.7 times less fatal. So it is indisputable that the current wave in Australia is less fatal. Now, I have no idea. I can't say why it's less fatal. The reality is it's probably a combination of many things, including we know more about the virus. We have many of our vulnerable people have been vaccinated. We no doubt have a better understanding of the protocols that we need to put in place to keep people safe. I've heard that the Delta virus is more transmissible but less deadly than some of the earlier versions. I'm sure all of these things have contributed in the reduction in the case fatality rate, but the data are clear. The case fatality rate as of day 53, which is the green line, 53 days into each phase, it's 2.7 times less fatal. Okay, so let me jump over to, I have two other ways that I've compared this data, so I just want to show you those. So now you can see that on this chart here, I'm showing the rolling average daily cases, so that this is a 7-day rolling number just to smooth out the cases. You can see here it's quite jagged. And so it's clear and obvious that in Melbourne, the total cases, or the 7-day rolling average cases, is significantly higher than it is in the current phase that's happening in Australia. It's about 2.5 times more cases 12 months ago than it is now. This is in an environment where everyone, all the commentators I see, are telling us that the Delta variant is more transmissible, it's highly transmissible. So even though it's highly transmissible, there are orders of magnitude 2 to 3 times less cases in the current outbreak than there were in the Melbourne outbreak going back last year. So let no one say that Sydney is out of control compared with what happened in Melbourne last year. The data don't lie. And then here is the cumulative case fatality rate. So this is showing what's happening over time. And this is showing that the same numbers that I showed you before, that the case fatality rates are much lower. And so when we standardize the comparisons of cases to deaths, the death rate is much lower. And I have one other way of looking at this data. It's basically the same data, and you can see those charts that I showed you before, these two here. This is just another chart showing the deaths on the same chart, just so it's easier to see. Of course, this chart here and this chart here are not standardized for the number of cases, whereas this one here is standardized for the number of cases. And then here's one additional chart here showing the total number of people in hospital for each of those phases. So once again, a lot more people in hospital in Melbourne 12 months ago, although when you consider the number of cases here are 2 to 2.5 times less, I would say that it's pretty clear that the actual hospitalisation rate seems to be higher. That's not a number I've calculated, but certainly on the surface it would seem that the hospitalisation rate is higher in this wave, even though the death rate is lower. So that's an interesting insight, which I'll have a look at some point in time. The other thing to point out, if I jump back to this chart here, is that, and if I remove this death lag slider so that we can see the point in time that we're actually at, this green line clearly now indicates that at the same stage in the Melbourne phase, they'd already turned the corner and had started to quash the virus. So the total number of cases was declining in Melbourne after this same point, which is 72 days in. And you can see here that in the Sydney case, or the June 21 case, it would appear that they haven't got on top of it. And in fact, if I show you this chart, which is showing the total cases in New South Wales that were not fully isolated, they're either not isolated in full or they are unknown, you can see that this chart is continuously growing. And so regardless of anything else, whatever's being done in Sydney at the moment is not controlling the number of community-driven cases in the community. And so that's it. The data don't lie. Hopefully you found this interesting. If you'd like to learn how to build these reports, please continue watching my channel.